follow up on that. I wonder if that starts to sound like strict scrutiny, because if the point of intermediate scrutiny, of course, is some leeway for the state, not a perfect fit, at least in the facial area. But if there's scientific uncertainty about whether puberty blockers and testosterone suppressants completely or mostly or some percentage of the time eliminate all competitive advantage, some competitive advantage. I mean, you've been very careful, I think, and rightly so, to talk about mitigating advantage. But I don't know, does the state have to show that it eliminates advantage and it doesn't eliminate, some percentage of advantage remains in each individual case, or for the group as a whole? I'm struggling to understand your response to Justice Kagan on that score. Maybe I'm inartfully posing the question, but I hope you understand.
I do understand your question. I think the question is at some level, I think the question is where you have science that's developing in real time at some level, what happens, how does that dovetail with a state that's trying to regulate and do that? I think what we can say on this record is the categorical exclusion is really not supported, I don't think, by any science. This again was from kindergarten through college. And so there'd be some subgroups at least. And I think there has to be an effort to try to tailor it. I think here the problem was there was a reaction of transgender women, a picture of what that would be, kind of an undifferentiated fear, frankly, from the Cleburne case. And so I think
I appreciate all of that, but it seems to me from my glance at the record, and quite a record it is, and, that there is a healthy scientific dispute about the efficacy of some of these treatments, and that's understandable. And I'm just wondering, how does that fit with, assume there is some dispute, and I understand the record remains to be developed further, but how does that fit with intermediate versus strict scrutiny?
At the end of the day, it's the state's burden to show a substantial relationship, and I think in the case of something where they're doing their best and have the best evidence some evidence to support what they're doing.
Some evidence, the best evidence, exactly. I mean, that's
a level of evidence that wasn't met here. So the study and the findings. I mean, the district court made a really good point. That study had actually been retracted, and it didn't pertain to transgender athletes. So in a way, this is not the hardest case. I appreciate it as a hypothetical. I guess what I would just urge in this area that's sensitive, obviously politically, but also as a matter of science, to at least let a record develop in one of these cases that lets you decide, actually, is this
I totally agree with that.
50-50 versus 80-20? That's
all right, but 50-50, does the government win? Does 70-20 the government win? That's what I'm getting at. I understand the complexity of the record and the difficulty of the science, but if we're going to have individual cases brought, that's the kind of question we're going to ultimately have to answer, not the science question, but the percentage question, if you will.
No, I understand that. I mean, VMI does provide some sort of a metric of what we would do there, which was we looked to see there were kind of evidentiary debates on both sides of that. But even if you could say that a lot of women may not have ever made the cut, the fact that there were some that did was enough to invalidate the entire policy. So I think there are ways for courts to make those judgments, and I think the court has not yet, I think, encountered a case where heightened scrutiny puts a heavy burden on the state. It's not an insurmountable one, like strict scrutiny normally is. And then what happens if it ends up with the evidence being a tie or close to it when we go back to the trial court? I think that would be that would be breaking some new ground, because I don't think there's an equal protection case that decides that issue. Usually the evidence is kind of clear on one side or the other about whether the restriction is justified.
That would remain for us to decide at a later point.
I do think that's the most prudent, but definitely on a record that's more developed, because I think I think in the end of the day, it might end up being a surprise we don't know yet, but I think we have some good evidence that actually at the end of the day, being transgender woman, actually to the extent there are, and you've repressed your testosterone, you're at somewhat of a disadvantage in many ways, because you have, again, this larger frame with weaker muscles and no testosterone.
Thank you.